How do I protect my plants from frost? Thing is, we know there are two frosts, a ground frost and an air frost. With a ground frost, all we have to do is stop the plants losing heat at night. And you can do that with fleece or paper or use a cold frame or an unheated greenhouse. That's usually enough to keep ground frost away. An air frost is much more difficult to keep out. It's much more penetrating. So they predicted 1 or 2 degrees of air frost. If you've got a cold frame or an unheated greenhouse and you cover your plants with fleece, you should be able to keep out 1 or 2 degrees of air frost. If it's 3, 4 or 5 degrees of air frost, that's much harder. You've really got to think about moving your plants or putting some heat in. It's not that expensive to keep an unheated greenhouse frost-free. It just needs a tiny amount of heat on a frosty night. So it's going to be an air frost and you haven't got an unheated greenhouse or a cold frame and your plants are outside. Best thing to do is move them back into your house where it's nice and warm. If you can't do that, then you've got to rely on lots and lots of fleece and think about lifting them up off the ground to avoid a ground frost. So if they were standing on a bench with lots of fleece on them, it would actually be warmer than if they were on the ground level. So should I worry if my plants get quite cool at night? Well, not really. When you think about it, outside in the summer the plants are cool during the night and warm during the day. So it's not unusual for plants to have a fluctuating temperature during the day. And then to give you an idea, we're going to run through our greenhouses. We keep them at different temperatures for different plants. And it'll give you an idea how cool they can be, and it won't do them any harm. So we're going to run through our greenhouses now and just show you the effects of the different temperatures. But you need to know what the temperature was outside. So yesterday, the maximum temperature outside was 12 degrees. In the greenhouses, they got up to 30 degrees. And that gave us an average temperature of 6.3. So any plant outside is going to struggle to grow. And then last night, we had a -2 degrees air frost. But down at ground level, that might have been 4, 5 or 6 degrees of frost. And we can show you what effect this has in the greenhouses. And it is quite temporary, the effect. And we're going to get a lovely sunny day following the frost, so the temperatures will rise quite quickly, and it'll bring the average temperatures of the greenhouse back up. In the old days, everybody thought you had to keep your temperature in your greenhouse constant, but now we know that the temperature can fluctuate up and down, and it doesn't make any difference to the plants. So here we are in our smaller little propagating greenhouse. The benches are heated, which allows us to root some cuttings, but it's actually quite good for growing plants where they just need to keep the roots warm, but we want the tops to be cool. So we do our tomatoes in here because we want a really tough plant to sell to our customers. But it is quite a good way of showing the effect of temperature. So this greenhouse has actually been down to just above freezing last night, and as I think you'll see, the tomato plants are still fine. And they went up to about 25 yesterday in the sun. So the average temperature is about 11, which means the tomato plants are still growing, but they're growing quite slowly. So they've got quite a good shelf life. And it also means when the customer buys it in the garden centre or takes it home, it's accustomed to growing cooler. So it won't get a shock as if it had come out of a warm store or it had been growing really warm and then chucked into a cold greenhouse. But just to give you an idea of the effect of the temperature. So again, this is our warm bench. I think you can see that this side is on the warm bench. This is right on the very edge. So the cold air comes up and cools this side right down. And you can see the effect of the temperature. This is really quite small. And then these are more like a normal size. Here we are in another house where we keep it quite cool. This is where we grow our patio plants to sell in the garden centre. Same as before, we're really trying to keep them quite cool so that when the customer buys them and uses them in the garden, they're ready for it. So in this house, it's been down to 4 degrees last night. We have a little bit of heat on just to keep the frost away. And it went up to 22 degrees in the sunshine yesterday. And the average is about 12, 12 and a half. It's a bit cooler in the other greenhouses. We use the vents to keep it as cool as possible during the day, but use the sunshine if possible to make the plants grow. So on a dull day it might be even cooler, and on a sunny day we'll let the temperature rise a little bit. So the reason is that the patio plants don't really need to be that warm. So if you've got things, we use nemesias, they're quite tough, and diacia, they're actually borderline hardy. But the Copa, surprisingly, will take quite a cool temperature. And even petunias. So our first of our petunias don't actually mind being quite cool. And you'll see it makes them really strong and tough. So how cold has it been in here? Well, we've actually got frost on the inside of the greenhouse. So here we are in another of our greenhouses. This is our most modern greenhouse, so the big panes of glass let lots of light in. So this is where we keep our warmest plants. And the temperature last night dropped down to about 9 degrees. And yesterday it was up to 27, 28 degrees. So that's given an average of 17 degrees. That's quite a good temperature, and we use it to grow the plants that need to be kept warm. So for instance, begonia non-stops, they like to be kept quite warm. And this one is only 3 weeks older than this one. So it shows you how much difference the temperature makes to a begonia non-stop. You can grow them quite cool, but if you grow them warmer and faster, they make a much better plant. How cold was it in your greenhouse last night? Thing is, you don't know unless you measure it. Even if you've got a thermometer and take the temperature at 8 o'clock, it doesn't really tell you what happened at 5 o'clock. There are some really cheap digital thermometers about now that will give you a constant reading, so you can see the temperature of your greenhouse going up during the day and falling again at night. It gives you a 24-hour average. That's the one that we use most in the nursery. If your 24-hour average is high enough, you know your plants will carry on growing. Some of them even have alerts, so that if the temperature drops in your greenhouse, it'll send you an alert to say frost. Perhaps the most useful way of using it is to work out how much frost you can keep out of your greenhouse. So if last night was -2 and the frost hasn't penetrated your unheated greenhouse, you know that you don't need to worry. If it was -5 and it had actually got into your greenhouse, you know what kind of frost level that you need to worry about. There are lots of digital thermometers on the market, so we've written a guide for you on our website.